Tonight on Fear Knocks. We pull off the interstate and into the kind of stations that still ring up with a bell. Two pumps under buzzing sodium, cracked concrete, and a hand-painted sign that always reads, "Open." These 10 accounts come from tow drivers, night clerks, highway patrol, and travelers who kept notes because their cameras didn't work. From desert frontage roads to Appalachian switchbacks and long plains straightaways, late winter into cold spring, we follow mile markers that move on paper, CB traffic that repeats tomorrow, and receipt timestamps that don't match the weather log. No spoilers, just enough to get you back on the highway with your tank topped off and your eyes up. Subscribe and hit the bell. If you've ever let the pump run after midnight, this one's for you. These are real places, real shifts. Listen close. Drop your own story below. We read them all. All right, let's get into it. I've worked the graveyard shift for 12 years, mostly at these small gas stations dotting Highway 54. You learn the rhythm of the road, the truckers pulling in for coffee at 2 a.m., the occasional late-night traveler, the quiet hum of the coolers. My station, just past the mile 240 marker, has 2 pumps out front and a single security monitor above the register. It's a basic setup, reliable. My routine is etched in stone. Check the fuel levels at midnight, restock the cooler by 1, reconcile the till at 3. Most nights, it's just me and the drone of the refrigerator compressor. That night started like any other. The air was cool, dry, carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant foothills. I was wiping down the counter, the faint smell of ammonia from the cleaner stinging my nose, when the bell above the door chimed. A sedan, an older model, dark blue, was pulled up to pump 3. The driver, a man in a worn jacket, came inside. "Pump 3, he said, his voice low. "It won't stop." I looked at the monitor. The pump display for pump 3 showed 17.8 gallons and climbing. The car was an older sedan. Its tank capacity would be around 14 to 16 gallons, maybe 18 at a stretch for a bigger model, but this looked standard. The dollar amount was already past 80. "Did you try rehanging the nozzle?" I asked, a standard first step. "Sometimes the sensor sticks." He shook his head. "It's been off the nozzle for a minute, still ticking." I walked over to the console, a small box under the counter that controlled the pumps. Each pump has its own override switch and an emergency stop. I hit the red button for pump 3. The digital display on the console, which mirrors the pump outside, continued to tick upwards. 18.1, 18.2, 18.3 gallons. The dollar amount increased with it. The pump was still running. This was unusual. The emergency stop should cut power immediately. "Okay, I'll try the main breaker for that pump." The main electrical panel for the pumps is in the back room next to the cooler aisle. I walked past the rows of soda, the cold air from the open freezer hitting me, a familiar chill that usually helped me wake up. I found the breaker labeled Pump 3. It was a heavy-duty switch. I flipped it down. The click was loud in the quiet room. Returning to the counter, I checked the console. 19.4 gallons, still ticking. The dollar amount now showed $94 and change. The pump was still running. This wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. An electrical cutoff should kill power to the pump entirely. I felt a prickle of unease. My shift supervisor always emphasized, if a pump malfunctions, isolate it. If it won't isolate, call it in immediately. I pulled out the station's logbook and began to record the incident. Time: 01:17 a.m. Pump 3 malfunction. Customer complaint. Breaker engaged, no effect. Gallons, 19.4 and rising. I noted the car's make and model, though I missed the license plate in my initial assessment. A small oversight due to the unexpected nature of the problem. I looked up at the security monitor. It displayed a grainy, black and white feed of the pump island. The sedan was there, parked at pump 3. The driver was standing next to his car, looking at the pump. Then, the image flickered. The car was still there. The driver still standing. But the pump display showed 18.5 gallons. The image reset. 18.6. 18.7. It was looping. The same 7 seconds over and over, the pump display incrementing with each loop. I watched it for a full minute, the numbers on the screen climbing from 18.5 to 20.3. Yet the visual loop remained exactly 7 seconds long. The time code in the corner of the monitor, which usually updated every second, was frozen. Then the driver looked at me, his face unreadable. "It's still going," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the pump outside. I picked up the phone and called dispatch. "This is station 240. I have a pump malfunction, pump 3. It's not shutting off, even with the breaker down. Security feed is glitching." Dispatch asked for details. I relayed them, focusing on the procedural failure. They said they'd send a unit to check the lot and advised me to keep the customer inside. While I waited, I looked at the receipt printer. It was spitting out a continuous stream of paper, line after line of pump 3 transactions. Each line showed the same amount: 1.2 gallons, $5.88. But the timestamps were chaotic. 01:18:34, then 01:18:29, then 01:18:41, then 01:18:31. They weren't sequential. It was like the pump was making tiny individual sales, but not in any logical order. I remember one summer, when I was a kid, my dad took me to an old arcade. One of the racing games had a glitch where the timer would occasionally jump backwards, adding time instead of subtracting. This felt similar, but far more unsettling. The driver sat quietly in a plastic chair by the coffee machine, watching me. I offered him a free coffee. He declined. The silence stretched, broken only by the whirring of the receipt printer and the distant hum of the highway. 20 minutes later, I got a call from Unit 401. "Station 240, this is 401. I'm at your location. The lot is empty. Repeat, the lot is empty." I stared at the monitor. The dark blue sedan was still there, the driver still standing beside it in the 7-second loop. The pump display on the console now showed 28.7 gallons. "Negative 401, I said into the phone, my voice tight. I'm looking at the security feed. There's a dark blue sedan at pump 3. The driver is inside with me. Clerk, I'm standing at pump 3 right now, the officer replied, a note of irritation in it. No people. I looked at the driver, who was now looking at me, his eyes wide. He hadn't moved from his seat. Sir, I said to him, what kind of car are you driving? He hesitated. It's a dark blue sedan, an older model. And where is it parked? Pump 3. I relayed this to Unit 401. The officer paused. Clerk, I'm at the mile 241 pullout now. I'm looking at your station. The lot is empty. I can see the pumps clearly. There's no car. I walked to the front door, pulling back the curtain. Through the glass, the pump island was dark, empty. No sedan, no driver. Just the silent, unlit pumps under the sodium vapor lamps. The air outside was still and cold. Yet on my monitor, the car was there. The driver standing by it. The pump display still ticking, now past 30 gallons. The receipt printer continued its frantic, disordered output. I looked at the plastic chair where the driver had been sitting. It was empty. The coffee machine hummed. I spent the rest of the shift with the lights on, the monitor displaying its endless loop, the receipt printer spitting out its nonsensical data. I logged everything, every conflicting detail. When my relief arrived at 6, I showed them the logbook, the stack of receipts, the looping monitor. They just looked at me, then at the empty pump island outside, then back at me. There was nothing to say. The sedan was gone from the screen by then, the pump display frozen at 37.1 gallons, $181.79. The time code on the monitor had finally stopped, showing 1:18:37. It was an hour and 45 minutes out of sync with the station clock. I never saw the driver again. The station never charged for the 37.1 gallons. And pump 3, when I've been running a heavy-duty wrecker for this county for 22 years. My rig, a Freightliner M2 with a 50-ton rotator, has pulled everything from overturned semis to submerged sedans out of the river. This stretch of Highway 17, from the county line down to the state park, is my territory. I know every turn, every dip, every mile marker. It's a quiet road, mostly truckers and ranch traffic, especially after midnight. The call came in at 2:03 a.m. Dispatch, Unit 1, we have a stalled vehicle, mile 88, Highway 17 northbound, white cargo van, hazards on, sitting square on the white line. Looks like a power issue. Any ETA? I keyed the mic. Unit 1 en route, 10-4 dispatch. Maybe 20 minutes. I'll make sure the dashcam is rolling. My routine is ingrained. Check the air pressure, flick on the strobes, engage the PTO. The smell of stale coffee and diesel fuel is a constant in my cab. I pulled out of the yard, the big Cummins engine rumbling a familiar bass note. The night was clear, cold, and still. A thin rind of moon hung above the eastern hills. One of my core protocols, especially on a two-lane highway in the dark, is constant communication. My CB radio, set to channel 19, is usually a reliable link to other truckers, or just background noise. It's a habit, a comfort. I flipped it on. Static, then a voice. My voice. Unit 1, approaching mile 86. Looks like a white cargo van, hazards on, sitting square on the white line. I'm going to need to block the lane. I froze. My hand was still on the CB knob, having just turned it on. I hadn't spoken a word since my last transmission to dispatch. My call sign, my observations, my intentions, all spoken by me, but not by me. It was an echo, but not an echo of something I'd just said. It was predictive. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Fatigue. That's all it was. 2 decades of graveyard. The dashcam, mounted just above the rearview mirror, showed the highway ahead, timestamp ticking over steadily. I always made sure it was recording, a safeguard for liability and an accurate record of every job. As I passed the old cattle guard at mile 84, the sound of the truck's tires thrumming over the metal grates momentarily distracted me. The CB crackled again. This time it was just a low hum, like a distant generator, then a brief, distorted burst of what sounded like my own voice. I tried to make out words, but it was just noise. I reached for the squelch knob, thinking I'd pick up interference from a distant rig, but hesitated. I wanted to hear if it happened again. Mile 86. The dashcam feed showed the green marker sign, clear as day. The road was empty. I scanned the horizon for the van's flashing lights. Nothing yet. My eyes darted to the CB. Silence. I tried to rationalize the previous incident. Maybe it was a skip, a bleed over from a trucker with a similar voice, or just my mind playing tricks. I remembered a simple, quiet Saturday morning, sipping coffee on my porch swing, watching the sunrise with my partner. That felt like a lifetime ago. Then, ahead, 2 amber pulses. The van, it was exactly as dispatch described, sitting dead center on the white line, its rear lights blinking rhythmically. As I got closer, the van's dome light became visible through the back windows. It wasn't just on. It was pulsing. A slow, steady throb like a metronome or a heart. On, off, on, off. Not a flicker, not a short circuit. A deliberate, measured pulse. I slowed the rig, engaging the yellow caution lights on my roof. I needed to block the lane, just as the voice on the CB had predicted. I radioed dispatch again, keeping my voice steady. Unit 1 on scene, mile 88. White cargo van, hazards on. Looks like a power issue. Dome light is pulsing. No driver visible from this distance. As I spoke, the CB in my cab blared, a replay of my exact words, but with a strange hollow quality, like it was coming from a tunnel. It cut off abruptly, leaving me in silence, save for the diesel engine and the van's distant, pulsing lights. My protocol for communication was failing. The CB was no longer a tool. It was an echo chamber of my own immediate future. I pulled up behind the van, angling the wrecker to protect the scene. The pulsing dome light was clearer now, a dull yellow glow against the dark interior. No movement inside. No response to my bright lights. I grabbed my vest, flashlight, and a set of cones. Before stepping out, I glanced at the dashcam's small monitor. The timestamp was correct, the road ahead clear. I'd check the footage later, just to be sure. It was a small, almost unconscious oversight, not verifying the integrity of the recording in that moment. I walked toward the van, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp asphalt and distant sagebrush. The pulsing dome light was hypnotic. As I got closer, I saw the van was a late-model Ford Transit, no company markings. The windows were tinted, but the dome light was bright enough to illuminate the empty passenger compartment. Empty. No driver, no passengers. The keys were not in the ignition. The doors were locked. I circled the van, checking for damage, signs of a struggle, anything. Nothing. It was pristine, just stalled. And that dome light, pulsing, always pulsing. I tried the doors, checked the tires, all normal. I ran the VIN. It came back registered to a rental company out of state. My eyes kept going back to the dome light. It was so steady, so deliberate. A normal short circuit would be erratic. A dying battery would be fading. This was like a signal. I got back in my rig, the cold seeping into my bones. I pulled out my tablet to log the incident details, then decided to review the dashcam footage, just the last few minutes, to confirm the mile markers in the van's position. I scrolled back. Mile 86, clear. Mile 87, clear. Mile 88, the van, hazards on. Then, the footage skipped. It went from mile 88 directly to mile 87, then back to 88, then 86. The sequence was 86, 88, 87, 88, 86. The timestamp was running continuously, but the mile markers were jumping around, contradicting the linear progression of the road. It wasn't a glitch in the display. The road itself was stuttering on the recording. The van was still there, the pulsing dome light a constant. I played it again, scrubbing back and forth. The numbers on the green signs, captured by my own camera, were undeniably out of order. Mile 88, where the van sat, was followed by mile 87, a mile behind it. Then it would jump forward to 88 again, then back to 86. My internal GPS on the dash showed me solidly at 88.0. I tried to call dispatch again, but the CB was just static. My cell phone had a single bar, barely enough for text. I abandoned the idea of a secure voice call. The protocol for reliable communication was entirely broken. I looked at the van again. The dome light continued its slow, deliberate pulse. The empty interior seemed to watch me. I knew I had to hook it up. I knew I had to get it to the way station where there was better light, better cell service, and hopefully some answers. But as I started to back the wrecker into position, the dashcam, still playing the looping, contradictory mile markers, suddenly went black. The timestamp froze at 2:27 a.m. The screen blinked once, then displayed error, corrupted file. I sat there, The smell of diesel thick in the cab, the cold outside pressing in. The van's dome light, it was something else entirely. And I was alone with it, on a road that no longer made sense. I've been a state trooper for 7 years. Most of them spent patrolling the high desert and mountain passes of the district. Out here, you learn to rely on your tools. The patrol vehicle, the radio, the body camera, the GPS unit mounted on the dash, the dog-eared road atlas, and even the old laminated strip map tucked into the visor. Distances are long, cell service is spotty, and precise location identification isn't just a protocol, it's a lifeline. Every mile marker, every culvert number, every road sign is part of a grid that keeps us, and the public, safe. It was late, just past 2100 hours, the kind of twilight that stretches into a long purple bruise across the western sky. Dispatch called in a parked sedan, a silver four-door, on the shoulder of Route 17, just past the scenic turnout at what they logged as mile 12. No occupants reported, just a concern from a passing motorist. Standard welfare check, maybe a breakdown, maybe just someone pulled over to watch the last of the light fade. I acknowledged the call, confirmed the location, and began my drive. Route 17 winds through some of the most remote sections of the district, and the scenic turnout at mile 12 is a popular spot for hikers and stargazers. I'd stopped there countless times, knew the stretch of road like the back of my hand. The air smelled faintly of pine sap and distant wildfire smoke, a common scent this time of year, thick and resinous. As I approached the turnout, my headlights cut through the deepening gloom, illuminating the silver sedan. It was parked neatly, off the white line, facing west. No visible damage, no hazard lights. I slowed, activated my overheads briefly to alert any potential occupants, then pulled in behind it. My internal GPS, usually rock solid, chirped, confirming my position. Mile 12.0. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The first thing I always do on a welfare check like this is confirm the exact location against a physical marker. It's a core protocol. You never rely solely on digital readouts. Systems fail. I walked to the roadside, towards the squat concrete post with its reflective green plate. This particular post should have read 12. It read 13. I blinked, then squinted. The light was fading fast, but it wasn't dark enough to misread a number this plain. A clear, bold 13. I pulled out my issued road atlas from the passenger seat, flipped to the correct page. The scenic turnout was clearly marked at mile 12. I cross-referenced with the laminated strip map, a weathered relic from the department's early days, still accurate for these older routes. It also showed mile 12. My patrol vehicle's GPS still displayed 12.0. I keyed my mic. Dispatch, Unit 1. Confirming location for the sedan on Route 17. Your log shows mile 12. My physical marker here reads 13. Can you confirm the original report? A moment of static, then dispatch's calm voice. Unit 1, copy. Report lists mile 12. Confirming with reporting party now. Stand by. I stood by, flashlight beam sweeping the parked sedan. It was empty. Keys were not in the ignition. Doors were locked. Nothing looked out of place. No signs of struggle, no personal effects visible. Just a silver sedan, parked, at a mile marker that didn't match anything. Dispatch returned. Unit 1. Reporting party states they saw the vehicle at mile 12, just after the turnout. Their GPS also logged it at 12. Copy that, dispatch, I responded, a knot forming in my stomach. I'm at the turnout, looking at the physical marker. It's 13. My GPS reads 12.0. My atlas and strip map agree with my GPS. This is a discrepancy. Understood, Unit 1. Logged. Do you require a second unit for confirmation? Affirmative, dispatch. Requesting Unit 2 to confirm the marker at the scenic turnout on Route 17. Advise them to approach from the east if possible. I figured approaching from a different direction might help rule out any localized GPS anomaly. While I waited, I decided to drive a short loop. Maybe I was tired. I'd been on shift for 10 hours straight, and the long, monotonous stretches of highway could play tricks on your eyes. I backed up, drove a quarter-mile east, then turned around and reapproached the turnout. As I passed the culvert just before the turnout, I kept my eyes on the marker post. It still read 13. I pulled over again, heart thumping a little faster now. This wasn't fatigue. This was a problem. Mile markers are the bedrock of our operations. They are surveyed points, permanent fixtures. They don't just change. I once saw my dad, when I was a kid, predict the next mile marker almost exactly, just by counting the telephone poles. It felt so reliable then, so absolute. I decided to get it on camera. I activated my body cam, ensuring the indicator light was solid red. I walked slowly towards the marker, holding my hand steady, narrating for the record. Unit 1, 21:25 hours. Approaching mile marker post at scenic turnout, Route 17. Post clearly reads 13. I held the camera steady on the number, then panned to the empty sedan, then back to the marker. Back in the patrol vehicle, I immediately reviewed the footage. The playback was crisp. I watched myself approach the marker. I saw my hand steady on the cam. I saw the number plate. It read 12. Then, in the very next frame, it flickered. 13. Then 12 again. Then 13. It wasn't a glitch in the recording. It was a shift, like the very fabric of the number was unstable, oscillating between two distinct realities. It happened too fast for the naked eye to register in real time, but the frames of the digital recording caught it. Over the radio, the repeater crackled to life, a familiar, slightly tinny voice. Highs in the mid-70s, lows dropping to the upper 40s tonight. Clear skies expected through tomorrow morning. That's your weather update, courtesy of the Route 17 repeater shack. It was repeating last night's weather forecast, a common occurrence when a repeater cycle gets stuck, but the timing felt unnerving. A static, disconnected voice describing a world that felt increasingly unreal. Unit 1 to dispatch, I keyed, my voice tighter than I intended. I have a visual anomaly on the mile marker. Body camera footage shows the number fluctuating between 12 and 13. My GPS is now fluctuating as well, showing 12.5, then 12.9, then 12.2, without vehicle movement. This is unprecedented. Dispatch was silent for a beat. Unit 1, copy. Unit 2 is approximately 10 minutes out. Advise if you require further assistance. Affirmative, dispatch. Advise Unit 2 of the potential cartographic discrepancy. I'm going to attempt to verify the next marker down the road. I drove east, towards what should be mile 14. My GPS was still jumping, never settling, but generally showing an increasing number. I passed another post. It read 14. Solid, unwavering. I drove back. The sedan was still there, a silent silver ghost in the deepening night. The marker post at the turnout was still there. I didn't need to look at it to know what the body cam would show. Unit 2 never arrived at my location. Or rather, they couldn't find my location. After 10 minutes, their voice came over the radio, laced with frustration. Unit 2 to Unit 1, I'm at what my GPS identifies as mile 12, but there's no turnout, no sedan. My marker post here reads 11. Unit 1 to Unit 2, I'm at the turnout, with the sedan, and my marker reads 13, but my GPS reads 12, and my body cam shows it as both. Where are you seeing mile 11? About a mile west of where? I've been a DOT survey technician for 15 years, mostly working the rural routes and mountain passes of the state's northern district. My work is about precision, charting old roads, marking new right-of-ways, monitoring bridge integrity. I rely on my gear like a pilot relies on their instruments. My total station, the GPS rover, and especially the handheld laser rangefinder, these are extensions of my eyes and hands. They tell me what's real, what's measurable, what's fixed. The day started like any other, well before dawn, the air still holding the deep chill of a spring night. I was at the district depot, running through my pre-checks. Standard procedure: calibrate the total station against a known benchmark, verify GPS lock, then a quick run-through with the laser rangefinder. I aimed it at the far wall of the depot, 100-meter shot to a marked plate. It read 100.01 meters. Then, at a closer utility pole, 27.3 meters. All within acceptable tolerance. I logged the readings, noting the ambient temperature and humidity. Maybe it was the early hour, or the slight fatigue from a late-night sorting permits. But when I pointed the rangefinder at the pole again, it flickered to 27.35, then 27.30, then momentarily jumped to 28.1 before settling back. I chalked it up to a cold battery or a bit of dew on the lens, wiped it quickly with a microfiber cloth, and reshot. 27.31. Good enough. A minor deviation, easily dismissed. My assignment for the day was a structural integrity survey on the old Iron Creek Truss Bridge, a steel behemoth spanning the Copper River. It's a single-lane structure built in the early 1900s, known for its creaking and groaning as traffic passes. The approach road winds down a steep switchback, hugging the cliff face, before leveling out onto the bridge deck. I arrived just as the sun began to warm the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across the canyon. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the metallic tang of river water. I set up my total station on the east abutment, sighting down the length of the bridge to a prism pole positioned near the west end. I needed precise measurements of sag and deflection. After establishing my baseline, I pulled out the rangefinder for a quick spot check, verifying my distances. I aimed it at the prism pole, 125.7 meters. Then I walked onto the bridge deck, the heavy steel plates groaning under my boots, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the soles. I moved to the midpoint, intending to shoot back to the east abutment. I raised the rangefinder, centered the reticle on the concrete face of the abutment, and pressed the button. The display flashed. 33.3 meters. I frowned. That was impossible. The abutment was at least 60 meters away from my current position. I lowered the unit, checked the mode, made sure it wasn't set to some obscure internal calibration. Everything looked normal. I raised it again, aimed carefully, held my breath. 33.3 meters. I tried aiming at the steel trusswork directly in front of me, a mere 10 meters away. 33.3 meters. I swung the rangefinder to the open air above the river. No solid target in sight. 33.3 meters. It was locked. Every single reading, regardless of target or distance, returned precisely 33.3 meters. I tried power cycling it, removing and reinserting the battery, even tapping it gently against my palm. Nothing. The digital readout remained stubbornly fixed. My primary distance measuring tool, the one I'd trusted for years, had become a single, meaningless constant. The protocol for troubleshooting equipment states that persistent, unresolvable errors require immediate cessation of work and a return to the depot. But I needed data on this bridge. I had the total station, which was still functioning. But the rangefinder was a critical backup, and this was my first deviation from protocol, a decision I would regret. As part of the bridge inspection, I also deployed a portable traffic camera at the east end, pointed down the bridge deck. It recorded continuously, logging time-stamped video for later analysis of traffic loads and patterns. I had finished my initial total station readings and was packing up some smaller equipment when I heard the distinct rumble of a heavy vehicle approaching the switchback. A large green dump truck, loaded with gravel, slowly made its way onto the bridge. I watched it pass, the deck plates groaning louder than usual under its weight, the driver giving me a quick wave. It disappeared around the bend on the west side. I continued with my work, setting up a different prism for another angle. About 10 minutes later, I reviewed a segment of the camera footage on its small monitor, just to ensure it was recording properly. I fast-forwarded through a few minutes, watched the dump truck cross the bridge, then continued scanning. To my surprise, a few minutes later in the recorded footage, the same green dump truck, loaded with gravel, appeared again at the east end of the bridge, slowly making its way across. I paused the recording. My mind raced. I distinctly remembered it crossing once. I looked up, scanning the road, checking my rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was empty. No truck. I rewound the footage, played it again. The truck crossed. Then, a few minutes later, it crossed again. Same truck, same load, same slow pace. I checked the timestamps. The first crossing was at 9:17:42. The second was at 9:23:01. Yet, I had only seen it in person once. I felt a prickle of unease. My equipment was giving me impossible data, and now my own eyes and the camera were contradicting each other. I remembered a simple job years ago, mapping a perfectly flat stretch of highway. The satisfying click of the rangefinder confirming each precise, expected measurement. The world had felt solid then, predictable. Now, it felt like static. Deciding the bridge itself might be influencing the electronics, I packed everything, including the now useless rangefinder, and drove further north, past the river, to a known survey point at the county line. It was a sturdy brass cap set in concrete, a reliable fixed point I'd used countless times. I needed to verify my total station, and perhaps, just perhaps, the rangefinder would snap out of its stupor away from the bridge. I set up my total station, took a few readings, confirming its accuracy against the known coordinates of the county line marker. It was fine. Then, with a sense of morbid curiosity, I pulled out the rangefinder. I aimed it at the brass cap a mere 2 meters away. 33.3 meters. I aimed it at a distant pine tree, probably 50 meters. 33.3 meters. I pointed it at the clear sky. 33.3 meters. It was completely desynchronized, divorced from any physical reality. I pulled the camera's SD card and plugged it into my laptop, intending to make a formal report about the faulty equipment. I started reviewing the footage from the bridge. The first crossing of the dump truck was there, clear as day. I fast-forwarded. Then, the second crossing. I checked the timestamps again, 09:17:42 and 09:23:01. I scrolled back, looking for any anomaly, any glitch. Nothing. The footage was continuous, smooth, perfectly normal. But it showed a truck crossing a bridge twice in 5 minutes, when I had only witnessed it once, and it had not reappeared in my mirror. The rangefinder was broken. But what was broken with the camera? Or with my perception? I saved the footage, noting the discrepancies in my logbook. I had no explanation, only the conflicting data. The world felt a little less solid, a little less predictable than it had that morning. I've been a geological field technician for 17 years, operating primarily across the arid regions of the Southwest. My work involves extensive travel, often alone, to remote survey sites. Precision is a cornerstone of the job. Every data point, every sample collected, every observation logged, is time-stamped to the second. My equipment, GPS units, inclinometers, ground-penetrating radar, is calibrated regularly. This meticulous approach extends to my personal logistics: fuel consumption, mileage, supply stops. A detailed logbook, a physical record, is always maintained in the vehicle. Last Tuesday, I was on an extended run, mapping a potential geothermal anomaly near the Nevada-Arizona border. The sun had already dropped below the western horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, but the heat still radiated off the asphalt in waves. My fuel tank was nearing a quarter, and I'd been driving for almost 10 hours straight. I spotted a small, standalone gas station and convenience store on a frontage road, a few miles off the main interstate. It was the only light for 20 miles in any direction. I pulled the heavy-duty pickup to pump 3, the diesel nozzle. The pump display was an older model, a faint green digital readout. After filling the tank, I noted the total: $87.35. I always pay cash at these isolated stops. It's a personal preference, a small ritual of detachment from digital trails when I'm out in the field. I grabbed a gallon of water from the cooler outside, its compressor humming a high, dry whine that was almost imperceptible over the engine's idle, and headed inside. The store was dim, lit by a few fluorescent tubes that flickered intermittently. A faint scent of stale coffee and dust hung in the air. Above the entrance, a tarnished brass bell hung from a spring. As I reached for the door handle, the bell gave a sharp, metallic ding. I hadn't touched it. I paused, my hand still inches from the cold metal. The sound echoed in the quiet space, then faded. I pushed the door open, a rush of cool, recycled air washing over me, a welcome contrast to the desert heat. Behind the counter stood a man in a faded blue work shirt, his face obscured by the low light and the brim of a baseball cap. He looked up as I approached, his eyes shadowed. I placed the water on the counter. "Pump 3, diesel please," I said, pulling a $100 bill from my wallet. He nodded slowly, his movements deliberate. He keyed in the amount on a register that looked like it belonged in a museum, its small orange LED display showing $87.35. He took the 100, placed it in the drawer, and then, instead of glancing at the register's change calculation, his eyes shifted to a large, round analog clock mounted on the wall directly above the register. Its face was cream-colored, with bold black numerals and hands. The second hand swept silently. "87.35, he stated, his voice flat. "Change from 100 is 12.65. He counted out a 10, 2 singles, a quarter, a dime, and a nickel. He pushed the coins and bills across the counter. I picked up the change, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the coins. My brain, tired from the long drive, did a quick mental calculation. $100 minus $87.35 equals $12.65. The amount was correct. But something about his method, the way he'd looked at the clock, snagged in my mind. It was an odd, unnecessary step. My own fatigue, I reasoned, was making me overthink a simple transaction. I often made small, trivial mistakes when my concentration lapsed, like once misreading a tire pressure gauge and overinflating a rear tire by 5 psi. As I turned to leave, my gaze drifted to the wall behind the counter. It was covered in faded Polaroids, tacked up haphazardly. Most were pictures of vehicles at 3 separate photos, arranged vertically. All showed the exact same car. A beat-up, dark blue sedan, rust blooming along the wheel wells, parked at pump 1. The first photo showed it under a harsh summer sun. The second with autumn leaves scattered around its tires, and the third, faintly, with a thin dusting of snow on its roof. Same car, same pump. 3 distinct seasons. The visual contradiction was stark. I logged the stop in my physical logbook. Gas station, frontage road, pump 3, $87.35 cash. Time 1947 PST, GPS. I paused, then added a note. Clerk referenced wall clock for change calculation. Odd. The discrepancy felt too minor to warrant a formal incident report, but it was enough to log. I stepped back outside. The air was still warm, but a subtle chill was starting to creep in. The same pervasive hum from the ice freezer outside the store caught my attention. It was a large chest-style unit, painted white, with a thick layer of frost on its lid. I decided to get another bag of ice for my cooler. As I approached, I noticed a faint, sweet smell, like overripe fruit, emanating from the area around the freezer. It was a strange smell for the desert and for a gas station. My eyes scanned the lot. Pump 1 was visible, but empty. The blue sedan from the Polaroids was nowhere in sight. I chalked it up to an old photo series, maybe a running joke among the staff, or a local's car that frequented the station. My mind drifted to a summer job I'd had in high school, working a register at a small-town grocery store. We were taught to be precise, to always double-check the register's readout. It was a simple, reassuring system. I opened the freezer lid. Inside, packed around the bags of ice, were several large, opaque plastic containers, the kind used for bulk food storage. They weren't ice cream or frozen goods. They were just there, filling the space around the ice. The sweet, cloying smell was stronger here. I grabbed a bag of ice, paid for it inside, this time with exact change, just to avoid another clock-based transaction, and returned to my truck. Before getting in, I decided to take a quick walk around the back of the building. The gravel crunched under my boots. The back lot was dark, unlit, save for the spillover from the station's front lights. Old tires, empty oil drums, and discarded pallets were stacked against the back wall. And then I saw it. Tucked away in the furthest corner, partially obscured by a leaning stack of tires, was the dark blue sedan. The same rust patterns, the same faded paint. It was at a pump, but not pump 1. It was connected to a different, older-looking pump, one I hadn't noticed from the front. The hose from this pump was not connected to the car. Instead, it ran directly into the ground beside the vehicle, disappearing into a patch of dry, cracked earth. The car itself was in a state of advanced disrepair. Tires flat, windshield shattered, and the interior filled with what looked like sun-bleached rags. It was clearly abandoned, a derelict. But the Polaroids. They showed the car at Pump 1, in different seasons, looking merely used, not utterly ruined. And the pump it was currently attached to was ancient, clearly out of service. I checked my logbook again. The time I'd logged for my initial transaction was 1947 PST. I checked my GPS unit, 1958 PST. The 11 minutes had passed quickly. I pulled out my satellite phone, a standard piece of field equipment. My intention was to call my supervisor, or even local law enforcement, to report a suspicious situation. The bell, the clock, the Polaroids, the abandoned car, the strange containers in the freezer. But the phone displayed no service. I tried again, walking to a slightly higher point in the lot, away from the building. Still no service. This was unusual. Satellite reception was typically consistent, even in these remote areas. I usually got a signal, even if weak. I looked back at the store. The clerk was still behind the counter, a static silhouette in the dim light. The analog clock above him, visible through the front window, showed 7:48. My GPS still read 1959. The discrepancy was now exactly 11 minutes. The clock on the wall was not just used for change. It was running precisely 11 minutes behind actual time. I stood there, the desert wind picking up, carrying the faint, sweet smell from the ice freezer. The bell above the door gave another solitary ding, though nothing moved. The blue sedan sat silently in the back, a permanent fixture, yet somehow out of time. I got back in my truck, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the questions unanswered, the logbook entry incomplete, and the memory of that anachronistic clock burning in my mind. I've been a line cook for 15 years, almost all of it in places like this: combo diner and gas station off a state highway, serving the early morning commuters and the scattered long-haul truckers. My shift starts at 3 a.m., long before the first hint of sun. It's usually just me and the manager until the counter staff arrives. The rhythm of the fryers and the coffee brewers a familiar comfort. My tools are simple: spatulas, tongs, the heavy steel griddle, and the stainless steel pass where I plate up the orders. I know the hum of every piece of equipment in that kitchen, the exact temperature of the walk-in, the draft from the back door on a cold morning. Our fuel deliveries are scheduled, always. The same company, same driver usually, every Tuesday and Friday between 2 and 3 a.m. The driver pulls up to the designated fill ports, always checks in with the manager first, gets a signature on the manifest, and then unloads. It's a tight operation because our tanks are old and we need to monitor the levels carefully. Protocol is everything. This particular morning, a Wednesday, started like any other. The air was still and cold. The first pot of coffee already brewing, its scent mixing with the faint, lingering smell of yesterday's fried onions. I was cracking eggs for the first breakfast rush, the sizzle on the griddle a steady sound. The manager was in the office, probably going over inventory. Then, around 4 a.m., I heard the distinct rumble of a large diesel engine pulling onto the apron outside. It wasn't the usual sound of our regular delivery truck. This one had a higher, rougher idle. I glanced through the kitchen pass window, the one that looks out over the pumps. A tanker truck was there, but it wasn't our usual hauler. The logo on the side was unfamiliar. A stylized eagle I'd never seen before. Not the familiar red and white of our contracted supplier. My first thought was that our regular company had subcontracted, or maybe there was a new route. Happens sometimes. The manager came out of the office, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They looked confused too, checking their watch, then the truck. The driver, a figure in dark coveralls, was already out of the cab, pulling hoses from the side of the tanker. They didn't even glance toward the diner entrance. This was the first real red flag. Every driver, without fail, comes inside first. They need the key to the fill ports, and they need that signature. The manager stepped out onto the apron, a clipboard in hand. I watched through the pass, wiping down my station. I saw the manager approach the driver, gesturing at the clipboard, then pointing at the tanker's logo. The driver just shook their head, a dismissive flick of the hand, and kept unwinding a thick hose. They were parked further down the apron than usual, almost at the edge of the property line, just out of the main security camera's optimal view. I remember thinking, that's odd. Why not closer to the ports? But I was focused on getting the bacon laid out, already a little behind schedule. It was a small detail, easily overlooked when your mind is on the morning rush. The manager tried again, stepping closer, their voice low but firm. The driver just ignored them, turning their back, connecting a hose to one of our underground tank's fill ports. I saw the manager's shoulders slump. They came back inside, their face tight. Wrong company, the manager stated, more to themselves than to me. Won't sign a thing, just started pumping. I shrugged, flipping a few pieces of bacon. Maybe a new company bought out the old one, or they're just running late on another route and stopped here by mistake. It was a tired guess, an attempt to rationalize the anomaly. That was my mistake. My fatigue making me dismiss the obvious breach of protocol. The manager walked to the back door, the one that led to the alley where our grease trap was located. They opened it, peered out, then quickly pulled it shut, a wrinkle forming between their brows. "Smell that?" they asked, their voice hushed. I hadn't noticed anything unusual over the smell of frying food and coffee. I stepped away from the griddle, walked to the back door, and opened it a crack. A sharp, acrid smell hit me, distinct from the usual exhaust fumes or the faint odor of old grease. It was raw gasoline, potent and heavy, clinging to the cold air. It was strongest right by the large metal lid of the grease trap. That made no sense. The fill ports were on the other side of the building, toward the highway. "That's not right," the manager said, their voice barely a whisper. They went to the office, and I heard the click of the phone keypad. They were calling our regular fuel supplier, then probably the police non-emergency line. From the pass window, I watched the tanker. The driver was now standing by the truck, arms crossed, facing away from the diner. They didn't move, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the pre-dawn gloom. The hum of the pump was low, almost imperceptible over the diner's ventilation system, but it was there. I remembered a summer morning when I was a kid, maybe 10 years old, riding my bike down a quiet country road, the air thick with the smell of dew and freshly cut grass. The only sound the chirping of crickets. This smell, this silence from the driver, was the exact opposite of that simple peace. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, the driver disconnected the hoses. They coiled them neatly, secured them, and then, without so much as a glance back at the diner, climbed into the cab. The truck rumbled to life, pulled away from the pumps and turned onto the highway, disappearing into the still dark morning. The manager emerged from the office looking pale. "Our supplier confirmed no delivery scheduled. They have no record of that company either." They stared at the empty spot where the tanker had been. "I've reported it. They said they'd send someone out to investigate." I went back to the griddle, the smell of raw gasoline still faintly clinging to my clothes. The first customers were starting to trickle in, their cheerful greetings a stark contrast to the knot of dread forming in my stomach. The manager went out to the pumps, shut them down, and put, out of order, bags over the nozzles. That was proper protocol, of course, but it meant lost revenue. And for what? An unscheduled delivery that wasn't ours. The sun finally started to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in pale oranges and purples. The world was waking up, but our little station felt like it was holding its breath. The manager, after dealing with a few disgruntled drivers, went to the small utility room where the underground storage tank, UST, gauge was located. This gauge is a digital readout that tells us the exact volume of fuel in each tank. It's a critical piece of equipment. We check it multiple times a day. I was wiping down the pass, the diner slowly filling with the morning crowd. Suddenly, the manager let out a choked sound. I looked over. They were staring at the UST gauge, their face ashen. "No," they whispered, their voice trembling. "No, this isn't possible." I walked over, my apron still on, the smell of fried eggs still on my hands. The digital display on the gauge glowed a bright, impossible number. It read, "Overfilled." Every single tank, not just the one the tanker had connected to, but all of them, showed the same status. Overfilled. It was beyond the maximum capacity. Our tanks were designed with automatic shutoffs, overflow alarms, and physical limits. It simply could not happen. The manager just stood there, staring at the numbers, then out the window at the empty apron, then back at the gauge. The raw gasoline smell, which had dissipated somewhat, seemed to return, sharper now, as if confirming the impossible. What had that tanker put into our ground, and why? We never got an answer. The authorities came. The pumps stayed shut down for weeks, and the environmental teams did their tests. The reports were vague, inconclusive. The fuel in the tanks was fuel. But there was too much of it. Far too much. I've been with the State Highway Department for 17 years, all of it in maintenance. Most of that time has been spent on the stretch of I-15 that cuts through the northern passes, a notorious section for rock slides, flash floods, and sudden, brutal snow squalls. You learn to read the weather like a book out here, to anticipate how a drizzle in the high country can turn into a river across the asphalt in an hour, or how a clear morning can become a whiteout by noon. My truck, a Ford F-550 with a utility bed, is practically an extension of myself, equipped with everything from chainsaws to survey gear, and always, a full complement of weighted traffic cones. Safety is the first lesson you learn, and it's the last one you forget. Last fall, just as the season was turning cold, we got a call about a minor slide on the old two-lane, State Route 17, a steep grade that parallels the interstate for a few miles before rejoining it at the crest. It's a lower priority road, but still our responsibility. The report came in late, just as dusk was settling, suggesting a few boulders and some loose scree, nothing major. My partner and I were the on-call crew. We loaded up, checked the weather radar one last time, scattered showers, moderate wind from the west, nothing alarming, and headed out. Setting up a work zone on a grade, especially in fading light, requires precision. Gravity is a constant, an unforgiving force. Every cone, every barrier has to be placed with the understanding that anything loose will inevitably find its way downhill. Our protocol is clear. Cones are weighted, spaced at 10-foot intervals, and always placed against the flow of traffic, extending far enough to give drivers ample warning. On a slope, we're extra vigilant, often adding sandbags to the base of the lead cones if the grade is severe or the wind is picking up. It's a fundamental safety rule, ingrained through years of practice. Secure your perimeter, or it will move. We reached the site around 7. The rain was more of a persistent mist clinging to the windshield. The slide itself was minor, just as reported. A cluster of basketball-sized rocks and a fan of gravel across the eastbound lane, near the bottom of the long ascent. We parked the truck in the lay-by, set out our flashing arrow board, and began deploying cones. I took the downhill stretch, placing them carefully, feeling the damp grit beneath my boots. My partner handled the upper section. I remember feeling a dull ache in my lower back. We'd been on a 12-hour shift the day before, clearing down branches from a power line easement. I went through the motions, placing each cone, giving it a slight nudge with my foot to ensure it was stable on the damp asphalt. Maybe I didn't check the ballast on the last few as thoroughly as I usually would have. My mind already drifting to the hot coffee waiting back at the shed. We cleared the debris quickly, piled it off the shoulder, and then, with the work zone still clearly marked, we packed up our tools. The cones would stay out overnight, retrieved in the morning after the storm had fully passed. It was standard procedure for a low-traffic area. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a thin, pale layer of silt over everything. The air had that sharp, metallic scent of ozone mixed with the damp, earthy smell of wet sagebrush. The sky was a bruised purple gray. We drove back up Route 17, my partner and I, ready to collect the cones and move on to the next job. As we rounded the bend approaching the lay-by, I slowed the truck. Something was off. The cones weren't where we'd left them. They were still there, certainly, but not in their orderly procession. The lead cones, the ones I'd placed furthest downhill, were now significantly further up the grade. Not just a few feet, but a good 30, maybe 40 feet. Clustered haphazardly near the crest of the rise. My partner swore under his breath. "Kids," he muttered, "or some drunk joyriding." But as we got out and walked towards them, the explanation felt thin. The cones were heavy, weighted, not easily moved without effort. And then we saw the prints. In the fine silt, leading away from where the cones should have been, and towards where they were a series of shallow indentations. They weren't tire tracks, nor were they clearly boot prints. They looked like impressions of something dragging, or perhaps prints of something heavy being pushed. But the unsettling part was their orientation. The cones had moved uphill, against the grade, yet the prints in the silt were set as if something had been walking downhill, pushing them. It was like watching a film in reverse. I remembered, as a kid, trying to float a toy boat upstream in a creek, convinced I could beat the current. It always ended up downstream. This felt like the opposite, something defying the natural flow. We had a portable anemometer mounted on a short pole near the crest, part of our storm monitoring equipment. I walked over to check its data log, hoping for some high wind reading that might explain the displacement. The digital display showed a consistent wind pattern throughout the night. Steady, moderate winds, averaging 15 to 20 miles per hour, predominantly from the west. I looked around. Along the roadside, several desiccated tumbleweeds, brittle and brown, were caught in the damp silt. They were all oriented and had clearly rolled east, directly against the recorded wind direction. My partner noticed it too. "That's not right," he said, pointing. "Winds from the west. Those things roll with the wind." Back at the shed, we pulled the SD card from the trail camera we'd set up near the lay-by. We usually deploy them low, aimed at ground level, to catch any initial washouts or minor slides that might occur on the shoulder. It's a good early warning system. The footage was grainy, blurred by the rain, but it was there. Around 03:17 that morning, a series of indistinct movements. The cones, clearly visible in the low light infrared, began to shift. Slowly at first, then with more purpose, they moved uphill. The camera, aimed low, captured what looked like a series of rhythmic depressions in the silt, moving alongside the cones. But they weren't boot prints. They were indistinct, almost like something dragging or stepping. But the perspective was all wrong. If I had to describe it, it looked like a series of impacts, or perhaps footfalls, occurring at roughly knee height relative to the camera's low angle. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was too regular, too deliberate, and too low. The camera's purpose was to catch ground-level events, but it wasn't designed to show us what was happening above the ground, at such an odd height. Our protocol for full-height capture of potential human activity was effectively bypassed by the specific placement for ground-level monitoring. We showed the footage and the log data to the supervisor. He watched the video twice, then stared at the anemometer readings and the photos of the tumbleweeds. He tried to rationalize it, suggesting a localized microburst, or maybe a prankster with a rope and a truck. But the backward prints, the low-angle camera footage, and the direct contradiction between the wind gauge and the tumbleweeds left him with no solid explanation. He just shook his head, running a hand through his thinning hair. We collected the cones. The incident was logged as unexplained displacement due to unknown forces. The anemometer was recalibrated. The camera checked. Both were functioning perfectly. The prints eventually faded with the next rain. But the image of those cones, creeping uphill against gravity, the impossible backward prints in the silt, the wind data lying to us, and those grainy, knee-height movements on the video. I've been driving buses for over 15 years now, mostly rural routes, connecting the smaller towns to the county seat. You get to know the roads, the landmarks, the rhythms of the land. You also get to know every gas station, every diner, every stretch of bad pavement. My routes cover 3 counties, a network of state highways and county roads where a bus is often the biggest thing moving. Reliability is key, and that means strict adherence to fueling protocols. Every bus has a fuel card, tied to a specific vehicle, with a daily limit and a list of approved vendors. We log mileage, fuel quantity, and location for every fill-up. It's a system designed for accountability and efficiency, and it usually runs like clockwork. Last Tuesday, I was on a charter, taking a group of seniors to a historical society luncheon 2 counties over. The usual route would have been State Highway 17, a straight shot. But a flash flood had washed out a culvert near Miller's Creek, so dispatch rerouted me onto County Road 42, a less used 2-lane that wound through some older agricultural areas. It added about 45 minutes to the drive, but it was paved, and the bus handled it fine. The issue was fuel. I'd topped off that morning, but the detour, combined with the bus's older engine, meant my gauge was dropping faster than I liked. The next approved station on the revised route was still a good 60 miles out, and the needle was flirting with a quarter tank. I knew the range of the bus, but I also knew how quickly things could change out here. A flat tire, another unexpected closure, and I'd be stranded with a bus full of passengers. As I approached the intersection of County Road 42 and Old Mill Road, I saw it. The old Crossroads station. It sat at the base of a disused grain elevator, a tall, rusted structure that had been a landmark for generations. The station itself had been shuttered for at least a year, maybe more. I remembered the owner, a quiet man who'd retired suddenly. The pumps were visible, faded red and blue, with peeling decals. The canopy above them was still standing, but sagged slightly in the middle, its corrugated metal roof streaked with rust. The windows of the small convenience store were boarded up, and a faded for sale sign leaned against a dusty display case inside. It was a ghost of a place, a relic. But as I slowed for the crossroad, a flicker caught my eye. A faint, almost imperceptible glow from beneath the canopy. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping, casting long shadows. My gauge was hovering just above empty. It was a long shot, a stupid thought born of fatigue and a touch of anxiety, but I thought, What if it reopened? What if someone bought it and just hadn't updated the signage? It was a small, professional lapse in judgment, a deviation from protocol. I should have pressed on, trusted the range, or called dispatch for guidance. Instead, I turned the bus into the station's cracked asphalt lot, pulling up to the diesel pump. The lot was overgrown, weeds pushing through the cracks. Puddles from a recent shower dotted the uneven surface, reflecting the dim, almost ethereal glow I'd seen. The canopy lights, I realized, were on. Not bright, like a modern station, but a soft, yellowed luminescence, like old streetlights. It was strange. The power had been cut to this place months ago. I'd heard the county had even condemned the building. Yet, there they were, reflecting in the standing water. I cut the engine, the sudden silence amplified by the distant hum of power lines running parallel to the road. The air smelled of damp earth, old diesel, and something else. A faint, metallic tang, like rust and electricity. I took out my fuel card, swiped it at the pump terminal. The screen, surprisingly, lit up. Please insert card. I inserted it. Processing. The small, scratchy speaker in the pump hissed, then, approved. My breath caught. Approved? At a station that had been dead for a year? I stared at the screen, then at the boarded-up store, then back at the pump. The display showed 0 gallons, $0. It was working. I selected diesel, unscrewed the bus's fuel cap, and inserted the nozzle. The pump clicked. And then I heard it. The low, steady thrum of the pump motor. Diesel began to flow into the tank. It was real. The gauge on the pump started ticking up, gallons and dollars accumulating. I stood there, watching, a knot forming in my stomach. The whole situation felt wrong. The station was clearly derelict. Dust coated the pump itself, and spiderwebs stretched between the nozzle and the housing. Yet, fuel was flowing. When the tank was full, the pump clicked off automatically. The total was exactly what I expected for a full tank. I hung the nozzle back, and then the screen prompted. Print receipt, Y/N. I pressed Y. The small thermal printer whirred, spitting out a crisp, white slip of paper. I pulled it free, my fingers tracing the raised letters. The first thing I noticed was the date and time. February 12th, 03:17 a.m. That was impossible. It was late August, nearly 5 p.m. Then I looked at the location. Crossroads Station, Old Mill Road, Weston County. Weston County. This was Clark County. Weston County was 2 counties west, and I knew for a fact they'd had a massive blizzard back in February, one that had shut down major highways. The receipt even had a small, almost faded line at the bottom. Blizzard conditions. I pulled out my phone. The canopy lights were still on, reflecting in the puddles. The boarded-up store was still dark. I took several photos, trying to capture the eerie glow, the derelict state of the place, and the impossible reflection of the lights. I photographed the pump screen, the receipt itself, making sure the date and location were clear. The fuel card transaction number was printed plain. Back in the bus, I started the engine. The familiar rumble, a welcome sound. I pulled out of the lot, heading back to County Road 42. The lights of the station, still on, receded in my rearview mirror. The bus felt heavier, full of diesel that had come from nowhere. The next morning, back at the depot, I filed my trip log and handed in the receipts. The supervisor, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years in the business, was reviewing the paperwork. She paused on my receipt from Crossroads. "Crossroads Station?" she asked, her voice flat. "That place has been closed for over a year. And Weston County? You were in Clark County, weren't you?" "Yes, Supervisor," I said, explaining the detour and the low fuel. "I saw the lights on and the pump authorized. It dispensed fuel. But the receipt, the date and location are wrong." I handed her my phone, showing her the photos. The derelict station, the puddles reflecting the lights, the pump screen, and the receipt with its impossible details. She stared at the phone, then back at the paper receipt. She pulled up the fuel card system on her computer. The transaction was there, logged under my bus number, for the correct amount of diesel, at the exact time I'd swiped the card. The system listed the vendor as Crossroads Station number 734, Weston County. "The system accepted it," she murmured, her brow furrowed. "It's a valid transaction, but the location and the date." She shook her head. "This makes no sense. The power was cut to that place. The pumps were disconnected. I remember the county inspector signing off on it. We called the fuel card company. They confirmed the transaction was legitimate from their end. The vendor ID matched a real, active account, though they couldn't explain the location discrepancy or the date on the physical receipt. They just saw a successful authorization and charge. The fuel in my bus was real diesel. It burned clean, and the bus performed as expected. The receipt, a crisp piece of paper, sat in the supervisor's office, a physical contradiction. The photos on my phone showed a station clearly abandoned, its canopy lights somehow still burning, reflected in puddles on a summer afternoon. Yet the receipt claimed a blizzard from months ago, 2 counties away. No one had an explanation. The transaction remained in the system, an impossible charge from a ghost station, for fuel that was undeniably real. I've been a wildlife officer for 15 years, mostly working the mountain passes and high desert fringes of the state. My jurisdiction covers a patchwork of federal, state, and private lands, meaning I spend a lot of time on the interstates, especially around the major interchanges where development pushes right up against wild country. My patrol vehicle is equipped for it. Thermal imager, tranquilizer rifle, dark projector, a full trauma kit, and a comms package that's usually reliable, even in the deepest canyons. Usually. This call came in just after 0400 hours. Dispatch reported an elk, possibly injured, causing a hazard on the westbound approach to the I-84-I-5 Cloverleaf interchange. Pre-dawn, and the fog was already thick enough to be a problem. Not just a ground mist, but a solid, opaque wall that swallowed headlights at 50 yards. The kind of fog that makes the world feel small, contained within the glow of your own high beams. I acknowledged the call, checked my rifle's charge indicator, and started the drive. My standard operating procedure for any large animal on a highway is immediate response. An elk can total a car, injure multiple people, and often, if it's disoriented enough to be on the interstate, it's already a danger to itself. My job is to assess, contain, and if necessary, humanely remove. The Cloverleaf is a known hotspot for deer and occasionally elk, especially this time of year, when they're moving between seasonal ranges. It's got a mix of dense scrub, a small creek drainage, and plenty of cover right up to the sound walls. As I approached the interchange, the fog intensified. It wasn't just thick. It had a strange quality, almost still. The ramp signs, usually reflective, seemed to generate their own eerie, diffused light. My radio, typically crisp, started to crackle. Unit 1, can you confirm location? Dispatch's voice was faint, distorted. Affirmative, dispatch. Approaching the cloverleaf now. Visibility less than 50 yards. Experiencing some comms degradation. I tried to boost the signal, but it was already at max. This area wasn't known for dead spots, not like this. I attributed it to the sheer density of the fog, maybe interfering with the signal bounce. A minor miscalculation, perhaps, but one I logged away as a variable. I've had radios cut out in deep canyons, but never on an open interchange. The cloverleaf itself was deserted, the usual pre-dawn truck traffic absent. The fog muffled engine sounds, creating an unnatural quiet. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the shoulders with my spotlight. Nothing. The report had been vague. Elk, westbound approach, near the on-ramp. I pulled off onto the shoulder, killed the engine and grabbed my thermal imager. The imager cut through the fog, showing heat signatures in shades of orange and yellow. Trees, static. Guardrails, cold. I swept it across the grassy median, then towards the concrete Jersey barriers that separated the lanes. And there it was, a faint residual heat signature. Not an animal, but a clear pattern of hoofprints in the soft, damp earth near the base of a barrier. Fresh. I stepped out, the air immediately colder than inside the cab. The fog swirled around me, tasting of damp concrete and something vaguely metallic. I crouched, shining my tactical flashlight on the prints. They were large, unmistakable elk tracks. But the pattern was odd. They circled the Jersey barrier, a tight, frantic loop, maybe 3 or 4 times, before abruptly stopping. There was no exit path. The prints simply ended, pressed deep into the mud, then nothing. No scuff marks where an animal might have jumped over, no drag marks where it might have slipped. Just a perfect, contained circuit of prints, then blank mud. I walked the perimeter of the barrier, my boots squelching. The prints were indeed fresh, the edges still sharp. I checked my watch. 0437. The initial call had come in at 0405. An elk wouldn't just vanish. I activated my radio again. Nothing but static. A low, persistent hiss that felt like it was coming from inside my head. The concrete mass of the overpass above, combined with the fog, was creating an acoustic shadow, trapping sound and apparently killing radio waves. This was a protocol failure. Comms were essential. I followed the only discernible path the prints took, which led away from the barrier, down into the drainage ditch that ran beneath the cloverleaf. The air grew heavier, colder. The rhythmic drip of condensation from the concrete above was the only sound. It reminded me, briefly, of a fishing trip I'd taken years ago, camping by a waterfall, the constant rush of water lulling me to sleep. The memory felt starkly out of place now. The drainage was narrow, overgrown with reedy grass and choked with discarded plastic and leaves. The elk prints continued, clearer here in the softer, muddier ground. They were still erratic, indicating a distressed animal, but they were definitely moving. The thermal imager showed nothing ahead, just the cold, dark tunnel of the underpass. I pressed on, my rifle held ready, the tranquilizer dart loaded. The prince led me deeper, parallel to the main highway, towards an old abandoned scale house that sat just off the shoulder, a relic from an earlier road design. The building was a concrete block, windows boarded up, a rusted weighbridge stretching out front. As I approached, the prints became even more bizarre. They didn't just circle the scale house, they seemed to lead through it. I swept the thermal imager across the front wall. No heat. I checked the ground again. The prints were undeniable, fresh as if made moments ago. They approached the front of the scale house, then continued on the other side, as if the elk had simply walked straight through the solid concrete wall. There were no breaks in the wall, no hidden doors, no collapsed sections. The prints were perfectly aligned, consistent in depth and spacing, suggesting a continuous gait. I stood there, flashlight beam fixed on the impossible evidence. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe the elk had jumped, or the mud was disturbed by something else. But the prints were distinct, deep, and continuous. I walked around the entire building, thermal imager sweeping. Nothing. No heat signature, no other tracks, no sign of an animal. Just the fresh, impossible hoofprints leading into and out of a solid concrete structure. I raised my radio again, desperate for contact, for another voice. Nothing. Just the dead hiss, a sound that now felt less like static and more like a whisper. The fog seemed to press in, making the scale house loom larger, darker. The silence, broken only by the drip of water and the hiss of the radio, was profound. I backed away slowly, my boots sinking into the mud, leaving my own prints alongside the elk's. The professional protocol for an animal hazard required containment and resolution. But what was I supposed to contain here? What was the resolution? I couldn't log, elk walked through solid concrete and vanished. I retreated, my mind reeling. The fog began to thin slightly as the sun approached the horizon, casting a weak, diffuse light. The radio crackled back to life as I cleared the underpass. Unit 1, status report, we lost you. Dispatch, I'm clear of the cloverleaf now, I said, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. Negative contact with the animal, no visible hazard, returning to patrol. I left out the part about the impossible prints, the acoustic shadow, the vanishing elk. Some things you just file away, unresolved. The mud would dry, the prints would fade, and the story would be just another unconfirmed report of an animal hazard. But the image of those tracks, circling a barrier with no exit, then passing through a solid wall, etched itself into my memory. A cold knot of dread that never quite loosened. I've been a regional fuel auditor for the past 12 years, covering a territory that stretches from the high desert to the coastal plains. My job involves reconciling discrepancies, ensuring compliance, and occasionally, digging into the kind of paperwork that makes your eyes water. I carry a calibrated dipstick, a portable spectrograph, and a tablet loaded with a proprietary auditing suite. Most days are tedious, a predictable rhythm of numbers and regulations. This particular audit began like any other, a quarterly review of a highway service station, Station 17, nestled just off Interstate 90. The initial fuel inventory check was my first step. I ran my dipstick down into the underground tanks, noting the levels, then cross-referenced them with the station's sales data and delivery logs. The numbers for the preceding quarter were off, a deficit of about 700 gallons across all grades. Not a catastrophic loss, but enough to trigger a deeper dive. My protocol mandates that any discrepancy over 0.5% of total sales volume requires a full ledger review, going back through daily transactions and delivery receipts. I settled into the station's small, cramped ledger room, a space that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and ozone from the ancient dot matrix printer. Stacks of paper, bound with rubber bands, filled metal shelves. My task was to match every sales record against every fuel delivery, day by day, for the last 90 days. It's a painstaking process, but essential for identifying patterns of loss or potential theft. I worked through January, then February, flagging minor inconsistencies, mostly decimal errors or miscategorized sales. Then I hit March, specifically March 18th. I pulled the daily transaction summary for the previous year's March 18th, then the one for the year before that, and then the one for the current year. Standard procedure. My eyes snagged on something unusual. The summary sheet for March 18th, 2 years prior, looked identical to the one from 1 year prior. My first thought was a filing error, perhaps 2 copies of the same day mistakenly bound into different annual sets. I pulled them both out, laying them side by side on the dusty table. The dates were distinct. March 18, 20XX, and March 18, 20YY, with 20YY being 1 year after 20XX. The transaction lists, line by line, were identical. Same number of premium sales, same number of regular, same specific gallonage for each. Even the minor cash register overage, usually a few cents, was the same, 7 cents. Both sheets were signed by the same shift lead, a person I knew only as the overnight supervisor, whose signature I recognized from dozens of other daily logs. The paper stock felt different, though, one slightly thicker with a finer grain, suggesting 2 distinct printings. It wasn't a copy. It was 2 original documents, a year apart, detailing the exact same day. This wasn't a filing error. This was impossible. My auditing software, designed to flag duplicate entries within a single data set, simply couldn't process 2 identical days across different years. The system assumed chronological uniqueness. I bypassed the software for this specific anomaly and started pulling more data. I checked the fuel delivery logs for both March 18ths. Both showed a 5,000-gallon delivery of regular unleaded at 03:17 a.m. Both signed for by the same delivery driver, whose signature was also identical across both receipts. The delivery invoice numbers, however, were distinct, sequentially appropriate for their respective years. I contacted the overnight supervisor by phone. Their voice was groggy. March 18th? Yeah, I was on shift, both of those years. What about it? I explained the identical ledgers. There was a long pause. Look, auditor, I run a tight ship. I sign off on the numbers. If they're the same, they're the same. I don't remember anything unusual. It was just a regular Tuesday, or Wednesday, or whatever it was. The supervisor sounded genuinely confused and a little annoyed. Their memory offered no explanation. My next step was the security DVR footage. Station 17 had a decent system, with cameras covering the pump islands, the entrance, and the back delivery bay. I requested the footage for both March 18ths, a year apart. The station manager, a young person who seemed perpetually overwhelmed, pulled up the files for me. I watched the footage side by side on 2 monitors. The first several hours of both days were eerily similar. The same early morning fog lifting, the same delivery truck pulling in at 03:17 a.m., the same few early bird customers. Then I noticed it. On the camera covering Pump Island 3, the clouds were moving from west to east. On the adjacent camera, covering Pump Island 4, the clouds were moving from east to west. On both March 18th recordings, the weather patterns were identical, yet contradictory within the same frame. It was like watching two different timelines folded over each other, each asserting its own reality. The same cars, the same models, even the same colors, appeared at the pumps at identical timestamps, but the drivers were different people. One footage showed a blue sedan. The other showed the same blue sedan, but the driver in the 20YY footage had a distinctive baseball cap that wasn't present in the 20XX footage. My mind struggled to reconcile the visual data. It was like a film loop, but with subtle, impossible variations. I felt a prickle of unease, a cold sensation that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I left Station 17, the 700-gallon discrepancy now feeling trivial compared to the temporal paradox I'd uncovered. My usual auditing procedures offered no guidance for this. There's no protocol for a day that happens twice. Driving back to the regional office, I passed a familiar stretch of highway. I remembered a childhood road trip with my grandparents, counting mile markers as we drove. It was a simple game, a way to pass the time. I'd always remembered the sequence of those markers, but something felt off. The mile marker I was passing now, 187, seemed to appear earlier than it should. I checked my GPS. It confirmed my location relative to the marker. Back at the office, I couldn't shake the feeling. I decided to broaden my investigation, looking for any other anomalies tied to March 18th. I started with county archives, specifically road maintenance and surveying records. I focused on the section of highway near Station 17. Deep in the digital files, I found something buried in a subfolder for historical anomalies, a category I'd never seen before. The records indicated that a 15-mile stretch of Interstate 90, encompassing Station 17, had its mile markers renumbered. Not once, but twice. The first renumbering occurred on March 18, 20XX, and the second on March 18, 20YY. Both entries stated the renumbering was due to unforeseen discrepancies in federal mapping data. Crucially, there were no official meeting minutes, no public notices, no budget allocations, and no work orders for either renumbering event. It simply stated the change had occurred on those specific dates. Furthermore, the two renumbering events resulted in the exact same new sequence of mile markers. It was as if the highway itself had been reset, then reset again to the same configuration, a year apart, both times on March 18th. I drove back out to that stretch of road, my tablet in hand. I stopped at what should have been mile marker 187. The physical sign read 187. My GPS confirmed 187. But my internal sense of the road, honed over years of driving these routes, screamed that it was wrong. That the numbers were correct, but the location of the numbers was off, shifted. It was a subtle, unsettling feeling, like a phantom limb. I filed my report, detailing the fuel discrepancy, the identical March 18th ledgers, the impossible DVR footage, and the phantom mile marker renumbering. My supervisor read it, then reread it, his brow furrowed. He looked at me, then at the report, then back at me. "Otter," he said slowly, This isn't standard. I can't sign off on this. There's no category for this. What do you want me to do with it?" I had no answer. The system, the procedures, my 12 years of experience, none of it had prepared me for a day that echoed, not just in records, but in the very fabric of the world. The 700-gallon fuel discrepancy remained unresolved. The duplicate March 18th, a year apart, persisted in the ledgers. A silent, chilling testament to something fundamentally broken in time itself.